Love me some commas, but love my community more. Glue me some braids, beat me some Mars. Trust me, you left me with so many scars. Top way. I'm painting a picture, he tell me to get it, I'm with it, I'm gone. Like what is you on?
How do I explain it? How do I mold it? Yeah, I try to tame it, rein it and control it, bottle it and save it, weightier than gold, picture it and frame it, it's never getting old. Top down, dilated eyes, living for the ride, don't care where we're going. Guard down, all our history, trust you for trusting me, I like where we're going. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep saying what you're saying, 'cause I love the way you love me. The sweeter things you said stick like honey in my head. You took all my baggage, put it on your back, yeah. Thought I had the whole package, but you're the piece I lacked, yeah. Oh, how could I repay you for all you do that I adore? At least I have forever. Top down, dilated eyes, living for the ride, don't care where we're going. Guard down, all our history, trust you for trusting me, I like where we're going. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep saying what you're saying, 'cause I love the way you love me. The sweeter things you said stick like honey in my head. Forever and ever and ever, ever and ever and ever, ever and ever and ever. Forever and ever and ever, ever and ever and ever, ever and ever and ever. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep saying what you're saying, 'cause I love the way you love me, babe. The sweeter things you said stick like honey in my head. Keep touching like you're touching, keep laying where you're laying, 'cause I love the way you love me, baby. The sweeter things you did stick like honey in my head. Forever and ever and ever, ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Forever
I don't deserve this life, I've been served this life. If I reverse this plight, I'd have to use this might. Rather use his height, his reach, his fight. Freddie Roach to Pacquiao or Uncle Mayweather. Right, can't sit and do nothing. Yeah, you heard that right, I ain't changing what you eat. I'm trying to change your appetite, giving sight to the blinded. Constantly reminding them that everything we lose, somebody gon' find it. Some ain't excited, been hurt down inside. Cause people selling truth, they was secretly lying. Frequently I'm in position where I'm flying. All around telling kids they gotta keep climbing. No wonder why them Fortune 5 is mining, lining our kids up for buying. A lot to do with timing, kinda like our kids been enlightened, distracted by everything shining, blinded, turning kids to moochers, whining, boosters, full blast. Suit you finding behind this, young's reviving, saying we ain't the future, right now is our timing. We are not the future, not the future, we're not the future. We are not the future, we're not the future, we're not the future. No, we're not the future, we're not the future. These kids don't even know the power they wielding. Responsible for millions, they built these buildings. For reals, man? Yo, it's about to get ill, son. Underage alcohol sells 18 billion. Yeah, man, kills them young or loads them up with drama for their lives begun. It's done, something with venom. Tries to befriend them, fills them with venom. Gets them tipsy, then gets them to fighting. Friends shouldn't let friends be drinking and driving. I'm in striving, changing the pace.
Friends shouldn't put friends in that position in the first place.
Designated driver, only his worst case. Alcoholic family survivor. First taste should be the last. Better yet, skip it all. Heed the call from the past. They blast that. We are not the future. Not the future. We're not the future. We are not the future. We're not the future. We're not the future. We are not the future. No, we're not the future. We're not the future. Later now, no way to tomorrow. Conditions are worsening, the feeling with sorrow. From Budapest to Chile, from the rest to China. Grown folks don't own nothing from the youth we borrow. All roads, all seeds, even them bleachers. All coaches, mentors, homeroom teachers. Seekers, believers, even new preachers. Democrat or them Republican speakers. Media leeches making money off the young and the restless. It's infectious. By middle school, you see what it festers. Call the arresters, it seems we're defiant. Somebody's gotta wake up these sleeping giants.
I'm inconspicuous, nobody knows me.
But if I'm one in a movement, then no one can hold me. Now that I'm old, see, I see that I'm only a rep for a nation of youth, and they told me. We are not the future. Not the future, we're not the future. We are not the future. We're not the future, we're not the future. We are not the future. No, we're not the future, we're not the future. Yeah, we're not the future, we're not the future. Yeah, we're not the future, we're not the future. Yeah, we're not the future, we're not the future. Yeah, we're not the future, we're now.
Gonna be alright,
Can't rest until I accomplish what I was sent to do.
Don't be blind, get closer to God. In a tight situation, this hip-hop, and we's a nation.
All my people, come on, come on, come on. All the ladies, come on, come on, come on. Everybody, come on, say
everything's gonna be alright.
like Bob Marley say, wake up and we start to praise. How we start the day, we fall from fake to jars of clay. Everybody come and walk this way, and yo, we'll let him hear. Let go of all your stress and fear. And yo, I'm trying to have the best this year. Your blessings near, yeah. So let's be clear.
Everything's gonna be alright.
Life is short, it ain't lasting long. So I'm rapping strong until the passion's gone. And leave a legacy and pass batons. And when I'm passing on, remember me, yo, but blast this song. Come on.
Every day we get up and fight. We choose to be the light. 'Cause everything gonna be alright.
Can't rest until I accomplish what I was sent to do.
Don't be blind, get closer to God. In a tight situation, this hip-hop, and we's a nation.
Everything gonna be alright. Alright, alright, alright. Everything gonna be alright. Alright, alright, alright. Everything gonna be alright. 'Cause if I fall 7 times, I know I'ma get up 8. I know I'ma get up 8. I won't be afraid.
closer to God in a tight situation. This hip-hop, and we's a nation.
Welcome to Mother Earth, where hurt people, and the birds are still tripping on the church steeple. Reverse the curse, set me verse lethal. I ride rhymes, let my light shine, watch me murk evil. Y'all keep holding on, I know you're strong, because life is really what you focus on. So skip the hatred, it's dangerous how to get each other. We're manipulated, Cambridge Analytica. I don't know who needs to hear this, but don't be mad at me. You wanna change the world, go home and live with family.
Good morning and welcome to the National Congress of American Indians, State of Indian Nations. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Once again, our program will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you.
It's gonna be alright. Singing, don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing is gonna be alright.
Everything's gonna be alright.
'Cause if I fall 7 times, I know I'ma get up 8. I know I'ma get up 8. I won't be afraid. Sunshine shining down on me. I cherish every sunrise I see. And before I lay me down to sleep, I pray my soul, my Lord, to keep one more sunrise that I'll see. Hey oh, hey oh, hey. Oh, hey, 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 Sunshine shining down on me. I cherish every sunrise I see. And before I lay me down to sleep, I pray my soul, my Lord, to keep one more sunrise that I'll see. Hey oh, hey oh, hey oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, that beautiful young lady.
Good morning. Please find a seat. Our program is about to begin. Once again, please find your seat. Our program is about to begin.
It's one life to live, so live it the best you can. It's one life to live, so live it the best you can.
Somewhere there's a person who lost a mother, lost a son, lost a friend, lost a brother. Way back they had a fight, never spoke hardly. Now they never get the chance to say I'm sorry. Somewhere there's a little boy who's ready to play. First game playing basketball, but this is sad day. See, dads had to fight with his moms and he was gone. Now we sad seeing other dads cheering their son on. There's a young girl cut in the flesh, suicidal, nothing but death. Up in the breath, molested by your loved one. The pain is rare, but won't tell anybody, cause the shame she feels. And somewhere there's a man cheating on his wife, playing with fire, been a liar all his life. And he laughs at his whole past and staying with sin, and doesn't know his wife's doing the same thing to him, and it's real.
It's one life to live, so live it the best you can. It's one life to live, so live it the best you can.
Somewhere there's a person who lost a mother, lost a son, lost a friend, lost a brother.
Please welcome National Congress of American Indians Executive Director Larry Wright Jr. to the stage.
A young woman just hit the stage, they throw dollar bills at her. She strips for days, she's getting paid, trying out different ways.
Yo-ho. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 State of the Indian Nations at the National Congress of American Indians Executive Council Winter Session. Today you will hear from our leadership, Youth Commission, and a congressional response from Congresswoman Betty McCollum from Minnesota. Before we begin, I would like to welcome Redding Rancheria Chairman and NCII Pacific Region Alternate Vice President, Chairman Jack Potter, to the stage.
Praise a lot, but sometimes it feels like heaven's gates are locked. Come Sunday, he's preaching all about his love, even though he knows his daughter's strung out on drugs.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are all doing fine and enjoying today in beautiful, beautiful Washington, D.C., which we know as Indian country. But I will do a blessing. Pui Bohemem Awilbas Oet Hamchinu Quidam Yamada Hattake. Nor San Palm Awilbas Uat Hamchinu Quidam Yamada Hattake. Nam Sanchu Shuli Awilbas Uat Hamchinu Quidam Yamada Hattake. Way Bolium Puyek Awilbas Uat Hamchinu Quidam Yamada Hattake. Oh. Thank you. You've all been blessed. Okay. So.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman Potter, for helping us begin today in a good way. Yes. Thank you. Ponka Moshe, Halash Maha, Dewa Noche, Ijajik Te Abli, Wishti, Usni Ponka Bli. Good morning, esteemed guests, dedicated leaders, and community members. My name is Larry Wright Jr. I'm the Executive Director for NCAI, and I come from the Ponca tribe in Nebraska, and it's an honor to be here today. I serve with immense pride as the Executive Director of National Congress of American Indians, the oldest and largest and most representative American Indian and Alaska Native organization in the country. For 81 years, NCI has served as a unifying force for Indian country, advocating for policies that uplift our people and ensure our voices are heard at every level of government. Our mission to protect and advance the rights and interests of tribal nations remains as critical today as it was at our founding. My role as Executive Director commits me to uphold this mission, ensuring that our collective efforts resonate not only within our communities, but across the halls of power, because that's where the decisions affecting our futures are being made. Today, we stand on the cusp of a new era. NCAI's 24th president, Chairman Mark Macaro, now in his 29th year as tribal chairman of the Pechanga Band of Indians, will soon share a vision that promises to deepen our advocacy, strengthen our sovereignty, and enhance the prosperity of our tribal nations, highlighting NCAI's crucial role in shaping that future. In addition to President Macaro's address, we are also honored to hear from the NCAI Youth Commission and a congressional response delivered by United States Congresswoman Betty McCollum from Minnesota. Now more than ever, we stand today together, bound by our shared history, our culture, and our aspirations. Let us listen, learn, be challenged and inspired by the words we hear, and let us move forward together. Throughout today's event, I also invite everyone in the audience to join the conversation online. Use the official hashtag Sewing2025 to share your insights, photos, reflections, and amplify our unified voice across social media platforms. Lastly, thank you for being part of this important moment. To our esteemed tribal leaders, government officials, partners, and allies, your presence here signifies the strength of our partnerships and the importance of the ongoing collaboration. NCAI will continue to stand at the forefront of advocacy for the rights and interests of our tribal nations. Together, we are forging a future where every Native person can achieve their full potential and be recognized and respected as the sovereign entities that they are. It is an honor to serve Indian country, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with all of you to do so. Next, we'll hear from the NCAI Youth Commission co-presidents Madison Brown and Angela Cerna. Please give them a warm welcome to the stage.
Cheering their son on. There's a young girl cut in the flesh, suicidal, nothing but death. Up in the breath, molested by your loved one. The pain is rare, but won't tell anybody cause the shame's.
Nyawes kenos kukwego, ayugaganos na gaiso onondowaka ne againanteko, johesta doehadoko. Greetings, respected leaders, tribal members, community members, and allies. My English name is Madison Brown. I'm Turtle Clan of the Seneca Nation, and I come from the Red House community on the Allegheny Territory. I hope you all are well and urge you all to consider the following with an open mind and heart.
Ani ni gach baneshi bidwadan and dishnakas, mekanak waje ninawak minawa, onoyote aka andunjaba, shikendo dem ojiboy naida kwe and dao. Hello, everyone. My given name translates to gentle calling birds, and my English name is Angelina Cerna. I am from the Turtle Clan, and I am Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians and the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. We are living in a time of immense global challenges: climate change, social inequality, and a rapidly shifting world order. These crises demand that we rethink everything we thought we knew about governance, decision-making, and our collective responsibility to the planet. In this critical moment, there is a truth that we cannot afford to ignore. Indigenous perspectives must be at the heart of how we address these challenges. For too long, the wisdom and knowledge of Indigenous people have been sidelined, dismissed, misunderstood, and misappropriated. Yet, our reciprocal relationship with the land, our sustainable practices, and our values of community are precisely what the world needs today. This isn't just a matter of seeking a seat at the table. It's about ensuring that the voices and knowledge of Indigenous people shape the conversation and guide the solutions. We come together today not only to honor our people, but to boldly claim our rightful place in the shaping of tomorrow. Madison Brown, my counterpart, and I will discuss how inclusive education systems, the revitalization of languages, and advancement of Indigenous and youth perspectives, and how that advancement goes beyond our borders for our collective resilience to the land. It is time for Indigenous voices to be heard, not as a token, but as a central, indispensable part of the global dialogue. It is time for our knowledge to be a principal part of human rights standards, our treaty rights to be upheld, and our presence to be respected. To truly advance Indigenous perspectives, we must prioritize investing in the next generation. Our children need to learn histories, not only the histories passed down through generations, but also the tools for self-determination, leadership, and critical thinking. Indigenous education should not be an afterthought or an ancillary component of their curriculum. It must be the foundation of a more inclusive education system, one that reflects the depth of our cultures and the strength of our communities. With an inclusive education system, programs such as the Title VI and Indian Education Grant supports culturally responsive teaching and learning services. Grant-based programs not only sustain but operate our educational systems. Native youth thrive in programs that are adequately developed for us, a sense of belonging and passive attention to our own personal education. Within these past few weeks, schools were referred to as echo chambers, where students are forced to accept specific ideologies without question or critical thinking. The inclusion of Indigenous curriculum not only provides a different perspective, but deeply enriches a student on the deep-rooted history of governance of the United States. Our children are beginning to learn in an educational system that is not only for us, but built by us. The immediate action to see that these programs are not only continued, but remain a key part of the relationship with tribal nations. The federal government must continue to meet and exceed educational needs for Native youth. A key pillar of advancing Indigenous perspectives is the revitalization of our languages. Language is far more than just a means of communication. It is the vessel that carries our history, values, and identity. For every language that is lost, a piece of who we are vanishes with it. I am deeply connected to the importance of language revitalization. My traditional language, Anishinaabe is severely endangered. 2 years ago, I took the step of enrolling in a language program through Rosetta Stone to reconnect with my heritage. My ancestors, however, did not have this opportunity due to the devastating effects of residential schools and forced assimilation. I want to be part of the change, not only for myself, but for the youth who need this connection to their culture as well. Integrating traditional languages into our daily lives is a form of self-empowerment. For Indigenous youth, learning their language strengthens their resilience against addiction, reduces risky behaviors, and promotes overall health and well-being. Research has shown that students who know their language are more likely to attend school regularly, perform better academically, and graduate at higher rates. On the flip side, those who lack this connection are 6 times more likely to harm themselves. We cannot afford to delay our efforts to revive our languages. This is not just a cultural imperative, it is a political and philosophical act of resistance against the forces that have long sought to erase us. The time to act is now. We must demand that Indigenous knowledge is recognized for what it is, a valuable, practical, and necessary tool for healing, for governance, and for a thriving future. In the halls of power, too often, our voices are drowned out by the noise of narrow political agendas. Our communities are reduced to mere statistics or talking points in debates about land, water, and resources. We must change that. We must ensure that our leaders, our elders, our youth, and our spiritual guides are present in every room where decisions are being made about our future. This isn't just about having a seat at the table. It's about ensuring that our voices shape the conversation. It is about understanding that the solutions to many of the crises we face lie in the deep, lived experiences of our peoples. The 2024 White House Tribal Youth Forum was a significant event designed to empower Native leaders by providing them with the platform to engage directly with federal agencies and officials. This invitation-based forum brought together a diverse group of young leaders from various tribal organizations and nations, such as NCAI, United National Indian Tribal Youth, Aspen Institute Center for Native American Youth, and the American Science and Engineering Society. The forum emphasized the importance of youth involvement in policymaking and aimed to equip young leaders with the knowledge and skills needed to advocate for their communities effectively. By facilitating direct dialogue between Native youth and government officials, the event sought to bridge gaps and create a more inclusive and responsive government approach to the needs of tribal nations. It has been proven that once we equip our people with the necessary tools and resources, our collective voice is louder and clearer. during the last administration, when Native youth looked to the Department of Interior, Treasury, and the White House cabinet, we saw people who came from the same communities as us. This served as inspiration for us and reaffirmed for us that we have no limits. From the Res Kids of Indian Country, thank you for your instrumental service. Through efforts, we, as members of the next generation, are reclaiming our rightful place at the helm of our communities, ensuring that our sovereignty remains strong and that we continue to protect and advance the well-being of our peoples and cultures.
We know that we have been the stewards of this land. Our ancestors have passed down knowledge of sustainable practices, agriculture, and natural resource management that are more relevant today than ever before. We are now in the wake of heightened censorship, and it follows a chain of science denial, the dehumanization of our people, and the ideology of profit over people. The time has come for Indigenous perspectives to be the foundations upon which policy is built. In Haudenosaunee teachings before our gatherings, we give the Ganonyok, or the words that come before all else. We first give minds to our one mind, that we give thanks to our spirits and our natural world as one. Collectiveness and community are at the root of our teachings. Our knowledge systems are built on harmony with nature, deep respect for the land, a profound sense of community, offering critical solutions to the complex challenges we face today: climate change, social inequality, and the breakdown of global ecological balance. The land is our kin, water is life. We hear those statements on a daily basis as Indigenous people, yet across Indian country, land and water is scarce, contaminated, condemned, and/or materialized. Our land and waterways are sought after by the capitalists who romanticize them, while a story of displacement, violence, exploitation, and demoralization is silenced. While within the past administration's Department of Interior, under a Pueblo woman, we were able to control that narrative and see water rights and land back initiatives be the focus of policy change. Under the bipartisan infrastructure law, $2.5 billion went to the Indian Water Claims Settlement Completion Fund, where tribes receive settlements to longing water claims. They met an unprecedented number of stewardships in the management of lands and waterways. In addition, 3 million acres across 15 states were restored to tribal trust ownership under the department's land buyback program. These actions not only advanced land and water rights, but were tangible for the foreseeable future. Land back and stewardship are interconnected with the revitalization of languages and culture, in addition to being essential practices to the climate movement and the dismantling of harmful systems and legislation. The purchasing of land and removal of Indigenous stewards ensure that Indigenous communities' lands, treaty rights, and cultural practices are violated, whereas land transfers, trusts, purchases, and stewardship reassert sovereignty. The future dialogue between the federal government and tribal nations must not be negligent to our lands and waters. This is our home, and our lands and waters belong under Indigenous sovereignty. The American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples state that Indigenous knowledge, cultures, and traditional practices must be respected because they contribute to sustainable and equitable development and proper environmental management. Co-President Serna and myself are advocates for our kin, and that advocacy knows no borders. We have a responsibility to advocate and take up space for all relatives. The land back movement is not specific to the United States. It is arbitrary. Indigenous people in Canada, New Zealand, Hawaii, Australia, and more know colonial rule. In 2024, the British Columbia government transferred over 200 islands back to the Haida people. Yet in New Zealand, the Māori people have been protesting a bill that seeks to interpret a treaty that will limit their full, exclusive, and undisturbed possession of their lands, estates, and waters. We must share space and go beyond our borders. We all have collective resilience to the land. I reiterate what my predecessor, mentor, and former youth commissioner, Yenenui Logan, asked of you all last year on the same platform. Reflect on your responsibility to establish relationships with the youth here today and ask them what they need from you right now. I call on our leaders to become familiar with their unbounded responsibilities to the generations before and after them. As a Haudenosaunee woman, I know that statement too well. On the Seneca-Allegheny Reservation, there are 10,000 acres of encumbered lands 2 generations ahead of me knew as their home, but were forcibly removed from for the development of the Kinzua Dam. Since last year, the 1365 Resettlement Committee and I have made headway to revitalize those lands, but I know that the resettlement may not come about within my young adult life. Nevertheless, it remains imperative that I continue this work so that my children may know the same traditional lifestyles my grandparents knew. Reconnected to the land, revitalizing the Seneca language, and reclaiming the Kinzua Take area as our home. 7-generation thinking requires continuous and immediate action so it becomes a reality. In the confusion that has filled our minds within the past few weeks, we have seen confusion turn into fear. Yet, Native youth are breaking down executive orders and yearning to understand what's happening in the House, Senate, and legalities behind the actions. I asked the leaders within the room to begin to advance youth leadership programs to promote the understanding of policy and legislative processes within your tribal, state, and the federal government. By promoting the understanding of policy and legislative processes and democracy within Native youth, Indian country will be better equipped to navigate any and all political challenges. I say this not as a plea, but as a reminder that the current state of Native youth is filled with hope and determination. We are not asking for permission to exist or simply to continue tribal youth programs. We are asserting our place in the world. Yes, we are youth, and there is responsibility in advancing our priorities, but we are youth with lived experiences and deeply rooted in the teachings of our elders. By providing us with the opportunities to learn and grow, and when it comes time in our journey to assume these roles of tribal leaders and government officials, we will continue to guide us to a future that is sustainable and just. In all spaces, the buffalo herd, the circles of life, or seatings within ceremonies, our youth and elderly are placed in the middle, surrounded by our matriarchs and men. We ask that you put us at the center, that you place us at the center. Native youth are protected by our communities, by the collective of Indian country, and are rooted in the teachings of our elders. All of our ancestors, and some in this room, lived through broken treaties, allotments, and forced removals. We are now living through executive orders and placed in a position where our status as sovereign people and American citizenship have been put into question. I share with you all a quote from Seneca Chief Corn Planter when he urged the Seneca people to change as a stronger whole when our future as a people was uncertain. We cannot waste one drop of our energy. We must live and change with the world around us. We must, and that adaptability lies with Native youth. Every breath, every step, and every effort from now must move us forward because this is not a time of change, it is a time of resilience. Nyahweh, thank you for your time, and Diga Danonyo, I am grateful.
Well, if I seemed nervous when I first came out here, it's because I knew these two were coming up. And it was no way I was going to be able to outdo that. So let's give them another round of applause. Yeah. Thank you again, Madison and Angelina, for your dedication to your communities and to advancing NCAI's mission. Our youth are our future, and we are proud to empower them as the leaders that they are. Now we will hear from NCAI President Mark Macaro, who will deliver the 2025 State of the Indian Nations address. Please help me welcome him to the stage.
Meyuyam. Polovamu echnai. Lovakapiva atwana iva opum ash. Greetings, everyone, and good morning. My name is Mark Macaro, and I'm in my 30th year as the tribal chairman of the Pechanga Band of Indians. I said, Larry, 29 was last year, and then Congresswoman McCollum said, you should go with the 29. Anyway, so I'm privileged to serve Indian country now in my second year as president of the National Congress of American Indians, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2025 State of Indian Nations. We gather on the land of the Nacotchtank Anacostan Nation, and as well as the neighbors of them, the Piscataway Nation. So we thank the one who is above for bringing us safely together, and we thank and honor our elders, our living connection to the time before us. I stood before you last year and said, I believe this is a moment for hope in Indian country. So I look back and marvel at how many hopeful things happened in 2024. At last year's speech, we were excited that Lily Gladstone had become the first Native woman to be nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars. Lily didn't win, but a few months later, she became the executive director of a documentary called Sugar Cane. That movie beautifully and painfully documents the systemic abuse of Indigenous children at residential schools. Now, a few weeks ago, Julian Brave Noisecat became the first Native American to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Directing for Sugar Cane. So, right? Absolutely. We still have many firsts to go. So, Lily made history last year and then joined a project that made more history this year. If that's not hopeful, what is? I also felt hope when President Biden made a historic apology for the federal government's role in Indian boarding schools. More work is certainly needed on that, but what an important first step. And I believe that apology happened because President Biden had a Native woman in his cabinet. For 4 years, Indian country's own Deb Haaland was at the center of so much. The Interior Department that she led signed more than 400 co-stewardship agreements with tribes, an incredible accomplishment. These agreements will protect sacred sites and preserve ecosystems, but most importantly, they honor Indigenous knowledge by bringing the tribal nations into the management of these places. There's so much more, and we are grateful for all of your work, Secretary Haaland. And finally, more than 250 Native candidates ran for political office in 2024. A historic 166 of them won, and 115 of them are first-time office holders, meaning we are building a bench and bringing our lived experiences to the halls of power. So, right? Absolutely. So as I consider this year, I'm not sure hope is the word I'd use, and yet I wouldn't use the word despair. It's been a tumultuous first few weeks of a new administration, but Indian country continues to have both the acumen and the tools it needs to push back where needed and to protect each other where needed. I also wouldn't use the word despair because in 8 short days, Leonard Peltier will come home, right? In Congress, they say this phrase, point of personal privilege here. My wife, Holly, who was here, did so much work to get these past few years. She did so much work in these past few years to get Leonard home. Nick Tilson and she spent a lot of time with a great team those last few weeks before the news came to us on January 20th. I mentioned Holly because I saw firsthand how hard she worked and how hard she worked with others to make this happen. And when I take a step back, I think of the generations of people who have worked for nearly 50 years to get Leonard home. Leonard's story includes traumatic reminders of the barriers that Indian country continues to face. It's also the latest example of what we mean when we talk about working with future generations in mind. Now, many who have worked on behalf of Leonard have walked on, but they did so believing that their work would ultimately pay off. And I know they're with us here still today. So I look at our Native youth using their voices in this moment and working to secure the future we envision for Indian country. And what we just heard is a perfect example of that. The state of Indian nations is strong because we have our women holding us up. And what we heard today was incredible. So I thank our Native youth for presenting the message they carried today. You know, they tell us things that we need to hear. That Gen Z, as a boomer, I say this, that generation, they look at the world differently, they see things and interpret things differently than certainly we do. Certainly me, I'll say that for myself. And so, and present us with challenges, and we need to, in good faith, meet those challenges. I'm grateful for them and for our Native veterans whose duty service, and sacrifice have served to bring honor to and protect the well-being of our people and of our ancestral lands. Last year, I also said the state of Indian nations is strong and on the rise. And I still firmly believe that, because as the people of Indian country are strong, so too are our tribal nations. There are warriors among us. Right here, we have what we need. So sovereignty is what this is about. But we must not ignore the gathering clouds we've seen in the past few weeks. The new administration has unleashed a torrent of actions that have caused confusion and chaos. I feel this approach was deliberate in its attempt to disrupt and destabilize. But don't focus on the disruption and the destabilization. Focus on what we need to do. We've seen members of tribal nations detained by immigration agencies in recent weeks. That is a rich image, right? Considering that we quite literally were here first, but that doesn't negate how painful it still is. When Congress or the administration are making decisions, they must do so knowing the unique obligations that they have toward tribal nations as sovereign political entities. We have a legal status as a political class rather than a racial class, something our highest courts have consistently recognized and upheld. Misclassifying this government's obligations to our tribal nations as diversity, equity, inclusion, or environmental justice, all these initiatives in this way disrespects our status and jeopardizes critical funding and progress. And undermining this trust relationship would reverse more than 50 years of trust built through the Indian self-determination and self-governance eras of federal Indian law and policy. So it's our job here at NCAI to both educate and remind these leaders of this important status that we have. We're already facing several challenges from the new administration. The freeze in federal funding caused panic throughout Indian country and beyond. That freeze didn't end up happening because OMB issued a memo rescinding the freeze, but still many tribal government funding portals were closed. Native Americans still lag far behind the nation as a whole in virtually all key indicators of healthy communities. Yet, as we gather here today, we don't firmly know about the security of federal funding for tribal programs that might address those gaps. This is not acceptable. Indian country has always been most linked to the work of Department of Interior. And an order from the Interior, I think the order came out on the 30th of January, discussed how to eliminate DEI and environmental justice initiatives there. In this case, that order also explicitly stated an exemption. And this was, I think, little circulated, so I'm restating it here. It stated explicitly that the statutory, that's for extra emphasis. It stated that the statutory, treaty, and trust obligations of the department regarding tribal nations remain intact and unaffected. That's very important verbiage. This order at the Department of Interior affirms the continued legal recognition of our treaties, which are foundational to the government-to-government relationship between the United States and tribal nations. Now, this order needs to serve as a standard throughout the administration, and we hope to see similar orders across all departments and agencies. So it's imperative to remind all policymakers that these obligations are not optional. They are legally binding commitments that have been in place for generations now. This theme is exactly what Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska also noted in a letter that she wrote to the White House Office of Management and Budget just last week. As chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, Senator Murkowski is calling on the administration to issue a directive that reaffirms tribal programs are not subject to orders targeting DEI and environmental justice initiatives. I'm grateful to Senator Murkowski for her work in demanding that programs that are grounded in the political and legal status of tribal nations never be misclassified as expendable. But Senator Murkowski can't do it alone. This moment demands vigilance from all of us. I know tribal communities are debating how to respond to the actions of the new administration. Well, I strongly affirm it's time to speak up. It's time to stand up. Tribal leadership must hold the federal government accountable to these commitments. That's why we are here. Those of you who are elected officials of your tribes, that's why you're here. That's why we're here to do this business. We're here in this moment for this. We must call our partners in Congress, in federal agencies, and across Indian country to stand united in defense of our rights. Programs that support education, healthcare, economic development, and environmental protection aren't just nice-to-haves. They are lifelines for our communities, and we as tribal leaders must work together to protect our people and our sovereign nations. As we reflect on this, NCAI reaffirms our role as the unifying voice of Indian country. We will continue advocating for stronger partnerships and pushing back against attempts to weaken the constitutional and legal foundation that protects our inherent rights and our sovereignty. As part of these efforts, NCAI recently convened a coalition of national tribal organizations calling on the administration to ensure that recent executive actions do not undermine the sovereign status, the unique sovereign status of tribal nations, or to disrupt the federal funding that flows from honoring those treaty and trust responsibilities. Now, this week's session here is part of that work. We will spend these days preparing for important meetings on Capitol Hill, so it's vital now more than ever that you make your voices heard. This is a call to action and a key to one of the ways that you can help. Some of our congressional allies have already sounded that alarm that tribal nations are not subject to these executive orders and funding freezes. Many more will help, but they need to hear our voice and they need to be reminded. We want to work together with this administration where we can on shared priorities. These include reducing unnecessary regulations, streamlining federal funding mechanisms for critical tribal priorities and economic development, strengthening tribal self-determination, and addressing long-standing tax issues that are historic impediments to tribal economic growth. As we face these federal challenges, one thing remains clear. Strong leadership within Indian country and across intertribal organizations is essential. We must build the capacity of leaders at all levels to protect, advocate, and secure our rights and shape our future. NCAI remains steadfast in its mission to support tribal leaders at all stages. We want to work with you to equip both emerging and seasoned leaders with the skills, networks, and resources necessary to lead your communities with confidence and vision. A critical part of this work is NCAI's Walking the Sovereign Path to Tribal Leadership, which provides a comprehensive framework for nurturing future leaders and empowering current ones. This initiative includes youth leadership conventions, mentorship under the NCAI Youth Commission, and advanced leadership training in partnership with leading institutions such as the Harvard Business School and the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Equally important is our commitment to fostering and strengthening alliances across tribal nation, intertribal orgs, and state and federal partners. Together, all these partnerships create opportunities for collaboration, knowledge sharing, enabling tribes to build unified strategies to address common challenges. As federal policies continue to evolve, tribal leaders must take our rightful place at the table. Discussions about infrastructure, economic development, education, and justice, and so many more. But we're going to need to focus and prioritize. Together, we can strengthen the sovereign rights of tribal nations and create lasting change for generations to come. That's kind of why we're here. That's kind of how we got here. So, one of the most urgent areas of concern for Indian country remains healthcare. By nearly every measure, life expectancy, rates of chronic disease, behavioral health challenges, Native communities face significant health disparities. Delays in federal health funding or reductions in support directly threaten the lives of our people and jeopardize access to hospitals, clinics, mental health resources, and public health programs. Indian country demonstrated extraordinary resilience and unity during the COVID pandemic. We have something to go by. We work hand in hand with our federal partners to protect our people. Remember, healthcare for Native peoples is not a policy preference or an entitlement program, but it's a fundamental part of the federal trust responsibility. The federal government's obligation to provide healthcare to tribal nations is deeply rooted in treaties, the U.S. Constitution, and in federal law. But this trust responsibility remains far from being fully realized. So we call on Congress and the administration to make mandatory the funding of Indian healthcare programs and elevate the Indian Health Service Director to the level of Assistant Secretary to increase visibility and advocacy within the federal system. Health parity also requires expanded access to culturally informed behavioral health services. Too many of our people carry devastating impacts from historic trauma, addiction, and mental health crises without the necessary support. We must see increased funding and workforce development for behavioral health programs in Indian country. And we continue to push for expansion of self-governance programs at HHS, right? This would enable tribes to take greater control over healthcare programs within the Department of Health and Human Services. Self-governance is key to ensuring our healthcare systems meet the specific needs of our citizens without unnecessary federal oversight. Public health infrastructure is another urgent priority. We need continued investment in health facilities, data systems, training programs, all to ensure that tribal health departments are equipped to protect and care for their communities. In urban Native communities, we call on Congress to pass the Urban Indian Health Parity Act. This bill from Representatives Raul Ruiz and Don Bacon would make an important full federal reimbursement at urban Indian organizations permanent. These organizations serve over 70% of American Indian health. These organizations serve over 70% of American Indian and Alaska Native people who live in urban areas and provide critical healthcare services to those on Medicaid. But they've never received the same federal funding support as IHS and tribal health facilities, which has meant that states have had to bear additional costs. We can't leave this to the states. So this bill will level the playing field between IHS, tribal health facilities, and urban Indian organizations. So we applaud Representatives Ruiz and Bacon, as well as the National Council of Urban Indian Health, for their bipartisan leadership on this issue. All these healthcare priorities will strengthen sovereignty and the government-to-government relationships. It will expand self-governance and invest in behavioral health and public health infrastructure, all in the name of closing healthcare disparities and gaps and ensuring that all Native people receive the care that they deserve. Our treaties and trust obligations demand nothing less. So, health is foundational to our survival, but so is education. Our schools and our students continue to face systemic inequities, including chronic underfunding and policy changes that threaten culturally relevant curricula. Tribal colleges and universities have demonstrated incredible resilience, and they have faced deep cuts that are expected to increase. These schools have been forced to reduce services that not only help students succeed, but also create economic development and cultural preservation in Indian country. This is unacceptable. We must protect and expand funding for TCUs. Yeah, absolutely we do. So, Native education is also under threat from federal policies that promote school choice. While these policies may create opportunity for tribally controlled schools to take access to new funding, they also risk taking funds away from public schools that serve Native students. The new administration has issued directives designed to redirect federal funds toward private and charter schools. This could deprive already underfunded Bureau of Indian Education and tribally controlled schools of desperately needed support. Any of these school choice initiatives must respect tribal sovereignty. They must prevent the misclassification of Native education programs under generic racial equity frameworks, and it must guarantee that federal Indian education remains secure. And when they're in school, our students, and all students really, must learn about our history, culture, and contributions to this country. Teaching Native history is not a political act. It is a responsibility that we owe to all future generations. Us Indians, we are merciless savages. Literally, if you don't know, literally that's the wording used in the Declaration of Independence to describe Native Americans. Schools must be allowed to tell the full story of this nation, including the central role of tribal nations and the ongoing impact of treaty rights and sovereignty without fear of federal restrictions or censorship. And while we're on it, it's an important reminder that proposed policy changes like these always require direct consultation with tribal governments as part of the federal government's treaty obligations. We cannot allow decisions to be made to us when they're not made with us. Prior consultation is mandatory to all proposed policy changes across the administration. This is a key part of our messaging, folks. So, the future of Indian country depends on how we invest in the education of our youth today. And I believe we absolutely can build a brighter path where every Native student has the opportunity to succeed. The educational opportunities that we seek cannot be reached if we don't have justice and safe communities for our people. Yet for too long, tribal nations have been forced to confront critical public safety and law enforcement challenges with limited resources, paltry funding, inadequate staffing and burnout, and jurisdictional barriers. We must strengthen and modernize the justice system across Indian country, ensuring that our people can live free from violence, exploitation, and fear. To address our shortage of public safety officers, one bipartisan solution in the short term is the Badges Act, which would empower the BIA to expedite background checks for officer applicants, helping to alleviate severe staffing shortages. It also would improve tribal access to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System to better resolve cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Every unresolved MMIP case is a tragedy that reverberates throughout our communities. And remember, so many MMIP cases begin with a call for service to the very tribal police agencies that are underfunded, understaffed, and under-resourced. We must not let these injustices continue unchecked. Tribal justice systems also continue to face chronic underfunding. The BIA's most recent report to Congress shows that tribal public safety and justice programs meet only 12% of identified funding needs. That's a $3 billion shortfall. And more than 25,000 additional law enforcement, let me say that again, and more than 25,000 additional law enforcement personnel are required to adequately serve Indian country. This is an intolerable condition. We really need big gains on this, folks. So the Department of Justice has supplemented tribal nations with over $1 billion in law enforcement grants since 2021. And while this funding is appreciated, it underscores the ongoing reliance on piecemeal solutions rather than strategic, sustained, and systemic support. Tribal law enforcement needs robust base funding. It should be permanently advanced appropriated. That's how we begin to gain the hope for safer communities. I mentioned this earlier, but it is alarming and disrespectful that the new administration's focus is focused on immigration raids that has swept up tribal nations' citizens. Our people who have lived on this land for millennia are being asked to prove their right to remain here. This is all kinds of wrong, and this needs to be fixed. The trauma of these incidents echoes the generational wounds inflicted by colonization, forced removal, and the boarding schools. As Dene Elder James Jackson poignantly reminds us, no one is illegal on stolen land. We stand ready to work with federal agencies such as the Department of Homeland Security to prevent these harmful incidents, but those agencies must also do better. Federal law enforcement must recognize and respect tribal identification documents and ensure that immigration policies do not undermine tribal sovereignty or threaten the safety of Native people. We also call on Congress to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act to fully restore tribal jurisdiction over non-Native perpetrators of violence. Now, Congress must also invest in building strong, culturally informed tribal justice systems, training programs for officers and legal professionals, infrastructure improvements for tribal courts and detention facilities, and expanded access to reentry and rehabilitation services. Justice cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. It must be tailored to the unique needs and values of our nations. Now, the path forward is clear. Bipartisan bills like the Badges Act must pass. We need sustained investment, however, and we must protect our citizens from unjust immigration practices while continuing advocating for the full restoration of jurisdictional authority. Doing this will honor the treaties and commitments made to our ancestors and safeguard the future of Indian country for all our people. Now, if I may be so bold, let me suggest that these investments in healthcare, in education, in the justice system are all aimed at preventing another Leonard Peltier. Leonard's story, that of an 80-year-old elder of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa, a boarding school survivor and one of the longest incarcerated Native American political prisoners, is a painful testament to the systemic injustices faced by Indigenous people in this country and across the globe. Peltier's release is a powerful symbol of what can be accomplished when we work together across political lines and across generational divides. It reminds us that justice is not a partisan issue. Justice is a moral obligation. Yes. Federal leaders, both current and future, must honor their treaties and trust responsibilities by safeguarding the rights and dignity of American Indians and Alaska Natives. Together, we must uphold the principles of justice, truth, and healing, no matter the administration in power. So, as we work toward justice and healing, we also must work toward economic development. Across the United States, tribal nations are charting new paths for economic progress. From fostering small, tribally owned businesses to expanding major tribal nation-owned enterprises, tribal governments are building sustainable and prosperous communities. These initiatives create jobs, they generate income, and enhance the quality of life, not just for Native communities, but for surrounding regions. When Indian country thrives, America thrives. The U.S. Treasury and the IRS have proposed regulations that recognize the unique tax status of tribally owned entities. This is significant. These long overdue rules would mean entities formed under tribal law and wholly owned tribal corporations will put tribal governments on parity with state governments and other local governments. This is a necessary element for us to succeed with economic development. The regulations also allow tribal nations to access more energy tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act, fueling infrastructure growth and energy independence across Indian country. However, our growth cannot continue without safeguarding the foundation of sovereignty. Recent executive actions and legal cases like the Maverick Gaming's challenge to the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act pose direct threats to the key revenue streams that many tribal nations rely on to fund essential services to our people, like healthcare, education, and housing. So let me be clear, these attacks are both historically and legally misguided. They're simply wrong. Indian country faces the dual challenge of defending sovereignty and ensuring that federal policies do not impede our economic progress. We're working with the champions of Indian country across Congress and federal agencies to ensure that decisions affecting us honor our sovereignty and our economic priorities. And all branches of government must be held accountable as we do this. Now, last year, NCAI partnered with the American Indian Policy Institute at Arizona State University to launch the Center for Tribal Digital Sovereignty. The center isn't just about technology, though. It's about governance, economic opportunity, and self-determination in the digital age. This initiative is a landmark moment in securing our place in the digital age and ensuring that technology serves as a tool for empowerment rather than exclusion. Congress and the administration also needs to expand the Buy Indian Act to agencies like the Department of Agriculture and improve federal contracting policies with entities like NASA and the Department of Defense. And the Tribal Tax and Investment Reform Act provide tribal nations with the same tax-exempt financing options that are available to state governments. An important point about Alaska and the Alaska Native corporations there. Congress designed a unique model of indigenous self-determination in Alaska through ANCSA, which includes ANCs. ANCs provide millions of dollars annually in direct payments to their shareholders through dividends and elder payments, but they also support services that touch the lives of Alaska Native people across the entire state. ANCs have provided more than $180 million in scholarships for youth since the 1980s. They make annual donations in the tens of millions to nonprofit and tribally designated community development organizations, and they fund language and culture preservation programs, provide burial and potlatch assistance, and secure valuable employment opportunities for their shareholders, descendants, and communities. ANCs are also a cornerstone of the Alaska state economy. As an industry, ANCs provide more than $6.1 billion in economic activity alone in Alaska alone. They support more than 24,000 jobs and are the only major businesses that have headquarters in the state, bringing global profits home to a state that all too often face extractive economic actors. ANCs originally enrolled around 70,000 shareholders. Excuse me. And today, they count their shareholder base closer to 160,000. These measures are essential for providing tribal nations with equitable access to business opportunities. Indian country's economic success is a testament to the strength of our sovereignty and the determination of our leaders and our citizens. So, putting all this together, in this moment, as we transition fully into the next administration, here's our action plan. Let us hold our ground. That's number one. Number two, we will not allow tribal nations to lose any ground as we move through the next few years. We look for policy alignments with this administration. We want to work collaboratively and continue educating them on the status of tribal nations and the need for prior consultation. So that's like 3, 4, and 5. We will foster and cultivate partners and allies within the White House and the administration. We will work with our congressional allies to avert further detrimental administrative action. We will continue our litigation analysis and preparation with NARF, the Native American Rights Fund, and we will not yield as we navigate the next 3 3/4 years. We stand firm, we hold our ground. So, in closing, I have a great-great-grandmother I want to share an anecdote about. If you have that photo, not that one. Oh, there we go. This is, our word for great-great-grandmother in my language is Nososa, but this is Nososa Leona Kaengish. Leona, my grandfather's maternal grandmother on my dad's side. She was born in 1802 and she died in 1915. She was 113 years old. I might have that gene because I'm 90 years old. So, anyway, she was a basket weaver until the day she died, even after she lost her eyesight. The last 30 years of her life, she was blind. She also started going deaf in her last 20 years of life. Now, the year she was born, in 1802, just 4 years before that, Mission San Luis Rey was founded, one of the notoriously famous missions in California mission system. There were 21. She was born into a world where she and her relatives were enslaved workers for the mission. And death and disease prevailed because of the mission system and the lack of immunity amongst our ancestors. There was a 90% population loss in the 40 years of the mission system. Somehow, Leona, my great-great-grandmother, managed to survive that period. And then what came next was not much better any way you look at it. Under the rule of Mexico, the flag of Mexico, there were lots of depredations amongst Native people. Lands continued to be taken. Lands were dispossessed. There was a lot of violence. And somehow she survived that. And then in 1848, gold was discovered in California. The gold rush was on in earnest in 1849. And her and her people survived that. California becomes a state in 1850. We negotiated a treaty with the federal government, along with 60-some tribes in California, in 1852. The treaty was not ratified. It was put in a drawer for 50 years. But we thought everything was okay in our last Aboriginal village in Temecula. Until 1875, our village was served with a decree of ejectment from a federal court. And so the posse of the county, an armed posse, forcibly evicted our village and removed us from the lands there. And we were landless and for 7.5 years. And so Leona, by this time, was, in 60s, 70s, and she survived all that. So in 1882, President Chester Arthur issues the executive order that establishes Pechanga Reservation. Finally, we have a place to call home that nobody's going to take over, take away. And so she lived the last 30 years of her life there. But why am I going through this? Why am I telling you that she lived through all these neck-snapping changes under 3 foreign flags and came out a survivor? Because she persevered. Now, I think her story is not so unique from many stories that each of you have amongst your people, your forebears, and your ancestors. I trust that you all have stories like this in your families and on your tribal communities. I think what might be unique is her age. There aren't that many people that we have pictures of who are 113 years. That picture was taken in 1909, by the way. So as I was writing these remarks today, I was imagining and hearing the response over the last 2-3 weeks from tribal leadership in Indian country. I was imagining what would happen, what would she say, and what would she think if I was able to have a conversation with her. Because my first thought was, man, this has been a tough 3 weeks. And the stuff that's coming at us, it's been rapid fire, it's distraction, and it feels destructive. And I think she'd look at me and say, you want to talk about a tough 3 weeks? How about the last century that I lived through? This is not a time to be a snowflake. I lived and suffered through what I lived through so that you could be here to do what you need to do. You need to stand strong and be who you are. So, I end how I started by declaring, as confidently as I've ever declared anything, that the state of Indian nations is strong. We have all we need to face whatever is coming. It's in us. But we need to do it together. So as long as we do it together, we will be strong as we face these next few years and do what needs to be done. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Powerful speech, literally bringing down the back of the house. Thank you, President Macaro, for your tireless dedication to advancing tribal sovereignty and advocating for our Native communities and continuing to build on NCAI's 81-year legacy of progress. Now we will hear from a strong ally for Indian country, Minnesota Congresswoman and Vice Chair of the Congressional Native American Caucus, Betty McCollum.
Good morning. Wow. I have to tell you, as a mother, as an auntie, and as a social studies teacher, those 2 young adult women, they rocked it. Let's give them another round of applause. They spoke to the heart of what brought me to Congress, and that's to make sure we leave, there's all kinds of phrases we use, the ladder down, the window open, the door ajar, to give them the space to make our nation and your nations great. And they did it. They talked about, they challenged us, right, on climate change. But the heart of what I had the opportunity, the first piece of legislation I worked in conjunction with NCAI and tribal nations was the Esther Martinez Language Act. Language is culture. And they talked about how important it is that you keep your culture alive to make the fabric of the United States stronger, brighter, and more beautiful. Thank those young women again for reminding us of their job. The first time I had an opportunity to interact one-on-one with Native youth was after we had tribal hearing. I was not the chair of the ranking member yet, and we had some young, very young teenagers who were in the audience when the leaders from Pine Ridge were talking about what was happening with suicide. And I asked those young people if they would just talk to us off camera, C-SPAN gone, everything else. We formed a circle. It was an amazing conversation, which just even made me more dedicated to work with your leaders and your elders. I want to just go back to some of the things that the president pointed out. Your president, my favorite president, and that's on trust in treaty responsibilities. But we not only need to recognize that as a national level, we need to work with you to make sure you are recognized by your states, your counties, and the municipalities you work with, especially when it comes to the work that you need to do with criminal justice and keeping your communities safe. There is so much work to do. Now, sovereignty. It sounds great, and I know the administration's talked about it, but as my grandmother would say, the proof will be in the pudding, right? What does that mean? And the first test is going to be, as was just pointed out, we need to recognize tribal identification. And if someone doesn't have it on them, just like if I don't have my Minnesota driver's license on me, if I got pulled over and left it in the other purse, I get an opportunity to bring it forward before any other action is taken, and that needs to start happening in Indian country right now. So I want you to know that I've had conversations with some of my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion, and they say that they're alerted and they're woken up to the problem that might be existing when it comes to fully implementing sovereignty. So what did the memo mean is the big question. The memo was pulled back, but some of the funding still is being locked up and not moving forward. So I need to hear when that's happening. Tom Cole needs to hear when that's happening. Mike Simpson needs to hear when that's happening. We need, Sharice Davis needs to hear when that's happening. You need to communicate us in real time because we are committed on trying to solve these problems as they start popping up. The memo, when it deals with DEI, what does that mean? We have been told by the administration it means one thing. I want to see the proof that Indian country really is not included in that. Your funding is interspersed throughout all the agencies. Think about how you work with the Department of Agriculture, whether it's in, First Foods. Think about how you work with the Department of Agriculture when it comes to applying for internet connectivity. Those are grants that are just kind of swept up, and in some of the grants, you're included in with them, but they also might say DEI in there for other communities that are falling behind. We need to make sure that the language that was spoken by this White House is the actions that are carried out. And then there's the Department of Health. What happens with the special diabetes programs and other parts of research that are being done in the NIH to make sure that when drug studies are done, they are culturally appropriate and they are also culturally inclusive. DEI members of the Department of Research and the NIH have been fired. So there is work to do, and I need your help doing it. You think of the EPA and the cuts and the talk about eliminating the EPA and how instrumental the EPA is in making sure that we live up to our obligations, and I'm talking about the federal government, when it comes to polluted waters and polluted lands. We need the EPA to be there, to be at your assistance in making sure we do the cleanup right. And then, as was pointed out, the tax status. You know, I don't serve on the tax committee. I've always kind of tried to avoid it. But you folks have made it impossible for me to avoid it. And so we are constantly having conversations with the Democratic members. And remember, you've got a great advocate in Gwen Moore from Wisconsin who serves on the Ways and Means Committee watching out for that. They better watch out for Gwen. She's ready to go. And then I also have a lot of questions about what happens to advanced appropriations. We have not in Congress, and I serve on the Appropriations Committee and I'm on the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. We have not done our 2025 bill yet. 2024 is done. You had advanced appropriations, so we're good for 2025. We need to make sure that when Congress reinserts whatever we do, whether it's considered to be a continuing CR, whether I don't know what they're going to do, but we've got a big mess. But we need to make sure that advanced appropriations is not only included in the 2025 bill, so it's there for 2025 and 2026, but I'm working with NCII and other tribal organizations to make sure that's also there for the Department of Education so youth services aren't disrupted. And as the president pointed out, we also need to do that in your criminal justice system. So here's what I'm going to say in closing. I need to know that what DEI means in all the other agencies and all the other grants that are out there. If we are being serious about respecting your sovereignty, honoring our trust and treaty obligations, that cannot get caught up in minutia and saying, oh, well, we'll fix that later. It needs to be fixed before anything more happens. The funding that you need to provide your programs needs to be delivered on time and responsibly. And then when we come to do the appropriation bills in the future, we need to work together side by side, hand by hand with you. Not with me suggesting things, with you suggesting to me in a bipartisan fashion that we have done with Chairman Cole and Chairman Simpson and so many others who are part of the Native American Caucus. As Mark said, Lisa Murkowski can't do this alone. We can't do this alone in Congress. We are only an instrument that's as good as the tool makers. You are the people creating the instruments that we use, helping us understand what they need to look like in order to serve your communities. I'm going to just take one more plea to share your stories in real time with us. Even if you don't have everything completely nailed down, we need to hear from you ASAP. I'm going to conclude as a social studies teacher because the youth that spoke, the two young women, and I guess they told me this is the first time you've had two young women speak together, and they kicked it off. Hats off. We need to know our history. And we need to know history factually and correctly. And I am so proud of what we've done in Minnesota, and I know Lieutenant Governor Flanagan will be, if she's not here yet, among with you over the coming days. You know, Chief Stanley Crooks and Marge Anderson, who were my two mentors when I served in the Minnesota House to learn about how to work together in unity with Indian country, worked really hard, really hard to make sure that we told the story of the Sioux Uprising correctly. You know what? It's not improper to call it the Sioux Uprising. When our territorial governor locked up food, medicine, the supplies that were promised to the tribe and wouldn't give them to the tribe, you can't blame Little Crow for saying, well, that's ours, it's locked, winter's come, we're going to go get it. But the whole story that finally got told about what happened compared to the history books I had when I was a young child were so rich. They were so meaningful. And how the whole thing could have been avoided. And then in the heart of the Civil War, when Minnesota was the first to volunteer. We weren't even a state yet. Minnesota also became a place of the largest mass hanging, and it was Native American men who were just trying to feed their families. Now, when kids go to school, they learn the whole story and how it could have been avoided just by treating people with dignity and respect, and the United States government living up to its trust and treaty responsibilities. So please know that I'm not only advocating and fighting for youth education in our schools and language and culture and all those other important things that you talked about. I'm fighting for it for the Norwegian Americans, and I'm proudly say French Canadians, who are sitting in the classroom learning the history of America too. We can only move forward in unity. We can only move forward making our country stronger if we look back at our past and say, these weren't mistakes. These were grave areas when our nation failed to treat our fellow brothers and sisters with dignity and respect. So I want to thank you for being my mentors. I want to thank you for including me in this very honorable journey I'm on to work with you. And I just can't thank you enough also for those of you I've developed such close friendships with. Miigwech.
Lost a friend, lost a brother. Way back they had a fight, never spoke hardly. Now they never get the chance to say I'm sorry. Somewhere a young woman.
I knew I liked her. I didn't realize she was a social studies teacher. I'm a recovering social studies teacher myself. So a little kindred spirit there. So thank you, Congresswoman, for your years of partnership and advocacy for Indian country. You know, we stand united in calling for urgent, sustained action to protect sovereignty, safety, and the prosperity of our tribal nations. Our inherent sovereignty is enshrined in treaties, the U.S. Constitution, federal law, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As we navigate this critical moment, I'm reminded of the power of unity. Together, through collective engagement and communication, we can demand accountability for those in power. We can defend our sovereignty, uphold justice, and ensure that tribal nations thrive for generations to come. Let us walk forward with courage and determination, honoring the sacrifices of our ancestors, as you heard from President Macaro, and the dreams of our children. There's a word in a saying in my Poncan language, Ede Wongide, which means we are all related. We are in this fight together, and we will hold our ground and continue advocating on behalf of Indian country with your help, your leadership, and your support. Gatego, Wiblahan, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today.
All bets in, yep, it's gonna be a good day. Let's get it in, yeah, get it all the way. Cause I'm here to slay, I ain't here to play. Such a good feeling when you're dealing with this type of energy.
Thank you for attending the National Congress of American Indians, State of Indian Nations. Have a great afternoon.